Welcome back to the podcast. And I'm incredibly pleased to say that even though this is only sound, the view we have is amazing. So over my shoulder, you can see out from the Dyson office over the river. Now, how do I pronounce it? Is it I? The river?
I River.
The I River.
Yeah, the
Lovely.
I River. It's the
Good.
I River.
Well, look, helping me here with my Dutch pronunciation is Gertin Schraa. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleased to have you here as well in this building, beautiful building. I mean, it's a lot of heritage in here. And, I think that recognizes, I think that if you go to all the Dyson offices across Europe, the world, there's always something iconic to it. I think
Yes.
that, and also this one is really lovely.
So I'd expected it to be super modern and engineering, when in fact it's sort of Dutch minimal. And then you come inside, it's modern. And then you walk up these incredible sort of Art Deco stairs. Amazing place.
Yeah, I know. I think that's also when I came here for the first interview, like, you look for a big sign that says Dyson or whatever, right? You can't find it because it's very minimum. On the door, it's Dyson. But if you then enter, then suddenly, wow, I came into a few offices of Dyson now in Europe. And I think the philosophy of Dyson is also, it's part of their philosophy as a company, to say, we want to rethink, reimagine, renew. So everything we do in buildings has a story to it.
Yeah.
So we use solar power, we rebuild old stuff into new, we reuse it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is what Dyson stands for, right? Which is great to be, because I think the culture in this office as well, like, it's not all brand new. It's not like if you have a look at the brand of Dyson, which all is engineering, it's new, it's innovative, et cetera. And here you suddenly are in a very old building. But on the other hand, it has a touch of technology into it because it is a great office to be in.
Yes. Well, look, I'm feeling jealous. But as a consumer, when I see Dyson, I'm thinking of your high street stores. And so London, New York, San Francisco, where I've visited a Dyson store, they're kind of the same, very space age, very minimal, 12 products, really celebrated with amazing lighting. So that's the consumer view of the brand. But when you look at the website, it's a totally different story. There are thousands of staff, which I was shocked by, global operation, real focus on sustainability and invention and innovation. So lots to unpack, which we'll get onto, especially given your role. But we sort of dived in with our architecture and heritage chat. Let's start with you. So tell us, firstly, who you are and your role at Dyson.
Yeah. So indeed, it's not a very English name. So Gertin probably is the best to pronounce it internationally, right?
Tell us the correct pronunciation.
But in Dutch, it's Gertin.
Gertin, lovely.
Gertin, it's a lovely hard G, right?
Yes.
So my official title is Head of Sustainable Sales, which is actually a new function to Dyson since last year. I came in contact with Dyson and we talked about the role. At that moment, it was a very great interview. The role wasn't really there yet. They were in discussions about it, but my resume was interesting to them because of my background in a bit of supply chain operations, and commercial e-com, etc. So, and they said, "Wow, Gertin, we're really thinking about doing something with all our returns products. We have to renew them, do something with it, and not only from a sustainability point of view, of course, but in the end, we're also here to make money, right? So we'll look at a new proposition. We want you to build it up."
Now, my experience is that Dutch people are very direct.
Yeah.
So when someone says head of sustainable sales, it sounds like a contradiction. You either want more sales or you want to be sustainable. So what was your first response when someone said, come and sell more, but in a sustainable way?
I find it interesting because it has a commercial touch to it. And that is something I love, so I do want to be part of the commercial side of business in the end to sell and make money, right? Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of companies are for. On the other hand, I think building up a new proposition also is something which sparked with me. At Philips, and we'll come back to that later, I built up the whole direct-to-consumer proposition, also from scratch. And I think also here, it's something new. Build up a proposition, greenfield, look at it, see how it works, etc. And I think that of course, sustainability and sales might have a contradiction. I don't think in this case, because you still do something with products that are otherwise collecting dust or you need to recycle.
So
Which
this
is
is
worse,
this is
which
the
is probably
interesting
worse,
bit,
right?
isn't it? Which is that link to things coming back to you and the recycling as well. So you've been in role now nearly a year. So how is the role shaped up? How would you describe it now, given that you've had a chance to settle in?
Yeah, so this role is focusing on our region EMEA. At start, when I came in, they already did refurbishment of returned machines, but there was no very clear strategy on which channels to sell, the pricing proposition, the branding of it, etc. And that's one. Secondly, there was a lot to do about the whole process from returns into the refurbishment cycle, the quality standards, how to shape the supply chain of getting spare parts in or harvesting parts from returned machines and all those things. So, and I think step by step, I took that, mapped it out and say, guys, what are the big wins we can gain in this proposition? And that was first, be very clear on your channel strategy and the countries to focus upon. Because when I started, we basically sold in every European country refurbishment. But then the business per country was very small. So do you then get the right effort of people, the right focus, etc.? I said, guys, I believe in less is more. First, shrink it down, create focus with a few countries, let it be interesting for the people to work upon, and then start to scale afterwards.
Right.
So fewer, bigger, better.
And so which countries did you end up focusing on?
So now we sell in Germany, Austria, France, Italy, and UK.
Right. And is that, so when you think about sales, we've already touched upon your direct-to-consumer Dyson stores.
Yeah.
We also see you online, of course, and in department stores, specialist stores. So you've got quite a mix of channels to market.
Yes.
Where does the refurb fit with that? Are you mixing it in, selling at the same time, or separate channel?
Yeah, no, good question. And I think we're still exploring, right? But next to the proposition, having it on our own Dyson.com store, which I think is important because also our consumers need to be aware of the fact that we don't only sell A grades, but also refurbishment, because out of the sustainability strategy we have. And I think there are a lot of customers, of course, going direct, and you need to offer them the full range of what we offer as Dyson, which is also refurbishment. And there's a big market for it. Secondly, we know that there are still a lot of marketplaces actually out there which focus heavily on consumers that are looking for a refurbished machine. And those ones are we now tapping into. So that's
and those consumers, obviously there are many reasons you'd want that, but if you had to weigh, are consumers doing it because they themselves feel they want to avoid waste, or is it because of pricing, or a happy mixture of both? Is there a difference, or is it?
No, that's a mixture of both, actually. From our research, of course, which we have done a couple of years ago also, there are many shoppers, So there are shoppers that look for a bargain. So they want the best price for a still Dyson. Can they afford a Dyson machine against the lowest possible price with a quality standard? Yes. And that's where we have also refurb for. And you have also channels where we see people acting because of also price. So eBay is a great platform.
Yeah.
We know eBay is a big platform, but we also know historically eBay is a kind of a bargain platform as well. On the other hand, we see more and more marketplaces coming up in Europe, which specifically target consumers that are buying because of their sustainability vision, their beliefs, etc. So if you are, for instance, in France, we sell on back market. Back market typically positions themselves as the marketplace for shoppers that from their belief want to do good to the planet. And that's where they buy. So that's where we are tapping into different markets with different marketplaces, touching upon different target audiences, actually. And I think it's great, even myself, I'm seeing it myself, a change in buying behavior, everything becomes more expensive.
Yeah.
Why not buy a second-hand machine, which is still good,
Of course, but also
There's nothing wrong with it.
If you keep your own machine for 5 years and you look at it and think, that's now an old machine, you're still happy with it.
Exactly.
But I think that there's also a cross-generational effect we're seeing with the millennials and Gen Zs, where they've grown up with parents who have branded items. And last century, they'd have bought, a good or better alternative and then traded up. Whereas now they're saying, well, I want the same thing my parents have, but I'll get it from eBay.
Exactly.
Or, I'll steal from them when they're not looking. So I think there's a real brand focus, especially for brands with a good engineering pedigree, so they're going to last 10 or more years.
Yeah. No, and I think in all fairness, our Dyson appliances are high end. There's a premium to it. So with even a refurbished machine with a bit lower price point, we're still able to tap into potentially new target audiences as well, which we hope they become Dyson lovers and stay connected to the brand later on as well.
Yeah.
So there are multiple effects which we're trying to tap into and see how we can get our products into the target audience who's looking for something like this, right?
And let's think about the people who are doing the refurbishment. So you have manufacturing around the world, and putting things together first time is one skill, but taking it apart, fixing it, putting it back together is another very difficult skill. So where does the refurbishment happen, and how are you managing the training and growth of those staff?
So across the world, we have several locations where we do refurbishment activities. If you then zoom in on EMEA, with the region where we're at, we do majority of our continental Europe refurbishment at a third party, Flex in Budapest in Hungary, which is known not only for Dyson, but for multiple brands. They do these kinds of activities. So not only repair, but also refurbishment, which is quite closely connected from a capabilities perspective.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK, we also do our refurbishment, which is owned by ourselves at this case. And then we have a team around, let's say for the globe, that looks at our quality standards, works with our outsourcing partner to look at how they basically get all the returns in, do the refurbishment, do the testing, the quality adherence to what we want, rebox them and able to be shipped out again. So against the quality requirements we set, right? It's something we want a certain quality standard to be delivered to our customers.
Yeah.
That's the promise we have to make.
Has this been going on long enough so that products have been refurbished more than once? So they've gone out new, come back as refurb and come back again? Or is it typically a new, then refurb, then you lose contact?
Yeah, exactly. So first focus is really one-time refurbishment. And then hopefully the people keep their refurbished machines for at least 7 to 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, if you use a vacuum cleaner for about 7 to 10 years, the yield is so low, you can't refurbish it. And then you just need to make sure you get rid of it in the right possible way through the recycling.
And to what extent are you involved in helping that recycling process? Because there's a lot of legislation in Europe, for example, around that. So is that something that falls under your remit or?
No. So yes, we do, of course, doing some pilots last year as well. We're looking at certain trade-in solutions, like you see already with iPhones, etc. Right?
Yes.
So you can trade in your old machine and you get a certain discount for buying a new one.
Right.
And then we want to control as well and get rid of the recycled machines or dispose of them in a good way, right? So we continuously to track how to recycle, how it's been recycled, etc., etc. So that's a quality requirement we put at those parties that do the recycling for us, of course.
Great.
And then now on top of it, we're looking at what can we do further in recycling, reuse of materials and stuff like that, which I think is a very untapped potential still at a lot of brands, which we need to do.
That's right. Now, we're talking about EMEA, but obviously you're a global brand. So when you look at the other regions, is there a sort of clone of you sitting somewhere in the Americas or Africa, Asia? And if so, how would you characterize the difference in maturity between what the EMEA market does and the other regions?
Yeah, so we have initiated likewise roles in other regions as well, led by also a group function, let's say global function to coordinate And I think you look at different maturity stages, the business and the way of doing business in other regions is different from each other. Like the US, for instance, we look at a higher percentage of returns typically. That is the US market, right? So
and why is that?
I don't know exactly.
Right.
I think the way, it's not related to Dyson, right? When I come from the former appliance industry as well, we see still a higher return in the US as well.
And return instantly, as in I bought it, I wish I hadn't, or I've used it for 3 months.
Within the remorse period, take it back and stuff like that. Yes.
So interesting. That's up on another time, I think.
And they also have their people that look after the whole refurbishment. They also make use of Flex as a refurbishment partner and then sell through marketplaces. So we have likewise functions. It's not always the same job title as we see, but we're maturing in this proposition in, let's say, people, process, tools. So we have a network within the globe, talk about challenges, opportunities and stuff like that because we're all learning still.
So I'll be interested in a second just to ask you about where the opportunities are, because it's such a fascinating area with so much growth. So I'd love to hear your view. But let's get super practical first. So you're sitting in the management team meeting and everyone's talking about sales, some innovation here, some philanthropy there. And then they all look at you and say, Gertin, how's it going? What's the KPI or KPIs that you're tasked with to deliver, within the group overall?
Yeah. So, of course, one is sales.
Yes. So you're still targeted on sales, yeah.
Quantities. Because what we want in the end is we have an X percentage of returns, which X% is scrap, X% go to back on stock as an A grade because it hasn't been touched, and the rest goes into our refurbishment cycle.
And so that's really
and that's what we look at. So we have a certain constrained sales because the maximum we can do is sell what we get back and where we get the maximum yield to refurbish.
So if, for example, the world changes and every product 100% perfect and every customer keeps every product, then you're going to run out of stock to sell.
Exactly. Yes. That's in the end maybe the goal as well. So the less returns we get as a company, the better it is, of course, right? Because we want to make sure the people are happy with what they buy and is against a good quality standard. So there's no reason to return, right? I mean, that's in the end what we all would love.
Yes.
We know in the world of e-com, etc., return rates are massive, and I think everybody will be looking at that. But in the end, I will be out of a job if we don't get returns.
Right.
Next to some other work I'm doing at Dyson, so I'm not too worried, but that's in the end our goal, right? So the constraint I have on sales as a KPI is what I get as a return, refurbish, and then sell out. That's the core KPI we look at to reduce the amount of stock we sitting in our warehouse collecting dust, right? We want to get them moving and generate cash flow for the company. We want to do that, of course, against a reasonable margin with a price that fits the expectation of a customer, but also, of course, is in line with how we as Dyson want to brand and market our products.
Yes. So there are two sides to that. There's obviously the cost saving through the avoidance of waste and a margin on sales. So an interesting balance there. But that sort of brings us on to coming back to you, because you've had in your career a mix of direct consumer sales roles and more operational roles as well. So our listener has waited long enough, and they've probably looked you up on LinkedIn by now already. But just give us this sort of sketch of how you ended up here. I have Philips and Cramp in mind, but there may be more. So what was your path to here?
It's always fascinating because I sound old now if I say this, right? But when I talk to younger generation as well, and they talk to me about how I built up a career and how you build up a career, and, because young graduates always think they can plan their whole career out, and it puts a pressure on them. Yeah. I said, guys, I never planned any career. Forget all about it. It will just happen to you. But of course, there are a few things in your character and your beliefs which probably will guide you. And then things will come towards you.
And you know whether to take them or not.
Exactly. So if you come back, I studied both marketing and a bit of supply and operations, where people say, that is rather strange, right? Because typically people in the commercial side of the business don't genuinely are interested in the operations of it.
That's also very Dutch, in that way of assembling different things within a degree where you can study, science, technology, and sort of softer liberal arts things. So
that's when, after my study, I got contacted from Philips, and they said, we have still manufacturing at that moment in the Netherlands, which is not there anymore. It was those days. It was all the last days of Philips manufacturing in the Netherlands, but we still produce vacuum cleaners and stuff like that. And there I started in logistics, doing lead time reduction, stock reduction programs and stuff like that. Went into purchasing. That was the moment when we launched Senseo.
Oh,
might still remember, like 2000, 2001.
Yes. It was it was the future
revolutionary of coffee drinking, right?
Yeah.
So that sold in millions. So I was lucky to be in purchasing because I always could reduce my cost price. I got my targets.
Yes.
So I went into China, restructured the whole purchasing department. At that moment, I also was part of sustainability audits, which typically now come back, right? So I'm not sure if it's the right thread, but from a purchasing department,
but
also
in
there,
those days, they were less purpose-driven and were more about cost and risk management.
Well, if you look at that moment, the reason for having also sustainability audits was to make sure we work with suppliers that are in adherence to the standards we would love to have as a brand. And we all know the examples of our famous Shell and everybody that, with child labor and stuff like that. So that's where we really got into the details of every single supplier to make sure their adherence to what we believe is right and how we want to do business.
And again, an interesting balance, because on the one hand, you're saying reduce costs, because I'm buying all of these Senseo things from you. So driving costs down with volume, but also saying we want standards to come up. So in a way, it's always this sort of pincer movement of push and pull.
You will always find cheaper alternatives, but you need to remember, right? Cheap is not the most sustainable way of doing business towards the future. And I think when you keep that in mind, you will always find the optimum balance. It will pay off in the end in terms of quality and stuff like that.
So you're in China?
In China, by myself, trying to find out and discover the world of China, which is fascinating. So I will, to all young people that are in early careers and even maybe older ones, go out there. The world is not your country you live in. There are different cultures, ways of doing business. And the philosophy of people in Asia of doing business is completely different than in Europe.
Yeah.
And you need to understand that, because that will help you throughout your business as well, when in contact with them, when doing business with them, etc. So it was fascinating. I spent there 6-7 months, saw a lot of businesses, saw the culture. So it was fantastic. Moved back, head of purchasing. And then there was a moment in my career where I thought, I'm now working 7-8 years. I have a bit of marketing and commercial background. I want to do something.
Time to use them.
Time to change. It's not easy. It's not easy to change cross-functional if people look at you being a supply chain, purchasing, logistics guy, saying, but I want to move into marketing.
Yeah.
So that was very difficult.
And how did you persuade them? Because this is something that my university-age children are saying to me, which is, should I go this path or that path? Whereas you had both. So you're there, a senior logistics person saying, look, can I have the budget, please, and starting some marketing? What persuaded them to let you do that?
A lot of talking first in the company, how people look at you, how they, how they think you could fit in or not, what they think is important in a role, and what you can bring from a capability perspective and skill perspective. Because from an experience perspective, you can talk long, but you don't have it, apart from your university. I got lucky that we had a black belt program in Philips.
Right.
And I ended up in a black belt program, and then I did a project in the e-com team of Philips. Actually, when we started a bit of the direct-to-consumer proposition. So probably I've done something well, because after that black belt program, they asked me to stay.
Right.
And I think that is because you show then certain capabilities and skills. And certain knowledge of e-com and digital, you can quite quickly learn and start to apply, right?
But also I think there was a time when the emergence of e-com shook things up a bit, and it was an opportunity for people to shift. As now, I think if someone's entering e-com, because the skills are so much more demanding and better known, that's not really where the chance for breakthroughs.
Agree. So that's why I said, a career is not to be planned.
Yeah.
Things overcome you sometimes as well. And I was at that moment, or maybe lucky or whatever. If it's luck, I don't know. But at least you get into an area where you just can apply your skills and capabilities, personality in an industry which is just trying to learn.
Exactly.
And it's going fast paced and you trial and error.
And rewards people who don't just know one thing,
Yes.
but know lots of things that can pull them together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so especially at that moment when entering into the direct to consumer e-com proposition. So we just launched one country. We started to build it up. I became in the end responsible for building out that proposition. And I think I used a lot from my past experience because in building up a direct to consumer proposition was something new to Philips as well, right? A manufacturer, 100-year-old,
Yes.
more than 100-year-old manufacturer by DNA suddenly start to sell directly.
Of course, and then all of a sudden, instead of having 100 major accounts, you've got 10,000 things called customers.
Single piece delivery.
Causing a problem.
Not shipping pallets, but single pieces. Having opening hours of call centers, not between 9 and 5, but certainly in the evening because people buy in the evening on their couch, right? So there's a lot of things to explore.
In the noughties, it was very easy to put a button on a website that says, click here and you'll get magic. But if you didn't have the operational capabilities behind that button,
exactly.
you couldn't keep your promises.
Exactly.
So I think that blend of especially supply chain operations logistics was really needed to make the promise of the web work.
Yes. And I learned a lot of new things as well, like product teams, working with IT and how this whole engineering works, and how things can go wrong.
Yes.
Everything you have to do with online payments and fraud and all the things. So we need to learn everything basically, which I love, It's greenfield, it's building, it's working with new people, new capabilities, trial and error. And what I loved is really multifunctional, It's from operations, what you said, operations, marketing, IT, payment, finance, and everything in between.
And of course now you've added in that post moment of purchase to the returns and then resell again. So, it's becoming more circular.
Yes.
But you were at Philips for quite a while.
Yes. I think around 19 years.
Wow.
Where people like, how, especially the younger generation, how can you stay 19 years in a big company? I said, agree. Let me first say, agree. It's a pretty long time. If you look at Philips, when I started, it was, and still is a big company, but at that moment it was a massive company, many different industries. It was still TV, audio, lighting, domestic appliances.
Medical,
everything.
scanners, everything.
So there was a lot to do. So every time you moved from a business unit to a business unit, it felt like you're almost in a new company, right? So, and I love to be part of a brand that produces a product, which I love. I'd love to be part of a company where there's a physical product where you can be proud of. You see out there in the street, people use it, people talk about it. I have that. So then in the end, after that period of 19 years, you saw the transformation of Philips. They already divested TV, audio earlier, then domestic appliances, lighting. So basically the old Philips, where people recognize Philips for, is not there anymore from an ownership perspective. It's still branded Philips, but it's
not the same.
It's a brand licensing.
Yes.
And they now focus heavily on healthcare, which I think is a great industry to be in. There's lots of untapped potential.
Yes.
Having healthcare at home, etc., rather than in hospitals. So I think the strategy is great. But there's a big transformation ongoing. And that was for me also a moment to say, am I stepping into that? Do I then continue that journey? Or do I think, I'm not sure if healthcare is the fast-paced industry, which I now want to be part of, which I love to be part of.
But then you're saying a fast-paced industry. I think your next move was then to Cramp, which, for me, trying to explain it to someone, it's like taking RS components or Euro car parts with agricultural machinery. I'm sure that's a terrible comparison. But for somebody who doesn't know comp, could you just try to explain
I had exactly the same. When they contacted me, and I didn't know about the company because it's a Dutch family-owned company
and very much
working
B2B.
Within Europe and B2B. So it's not a consumer brand. Nobody knows it. It's behind the login, right? So you dive into it, you start to read about it. And then my first reaction was the same, like agriculture, B2B. Oof. Not sure if that is something I should tap into. But when you start to read about it, talk to people about it. There's a fascinating world of how agriculture actually is quite dynamic.
Yes.
So, and especially if you look at the company of Cramp, who's a leading wholesaler in agricultural spare parts, serving around 600,000 parts in Europe.
1,000.
The core need is that keep farmers farming.
Yeah.
So if something breaks, you lose money. So it needs to be on the spot, the right product at the right time, at the right place. And I think that philosophy in itself resulted in the fact that this company already launched their first online web shop early 2000.
Yes.
So the big philosophy, the owner was there already. They continued to invest in that. And nowadays, almost all orders go online, which is in B2B unknown, right? I mean, it's still a bit lagging versus B2C, but almost all orders online. Their warehouses, to a large extent, are robotized. So deliver, or let's order this afternoon, deliver sometimes in night, which a lot of B2C brands even can't do, right?
No. But when you say that, I mean, looking at the stock, because I thought I'd just have a quick look 2 hours later. It's everything from engine gaskets for a tractor up to cab fairings, which must weigh, 200-300 kilograms. And so I'm just imagining a warehouse where you're trying to pick and pack things that weigh 10 grams and are flexible, size of A4, and these enormous things. So the logistical challenge there is enormous.
Yeah, it was enormous. So the first moment I entered actually a warehouse, I was like, wow.
It's got a space age.
This space, all the different articles, ranging indeed from very small screws until barbecues and everything we have, right? And even custom-made parts. And I think that was the philosophy of the company. We need to serve everything for the farmer, everything.
So you've done direct-to-consumer commerce, e-com, logistics, purchasing, international, agricultural, B2B, just-in-time, massive SKU range. Then the phone rings and it's Dyson. Just tell me about what was the moment you thought, this is it, I want to go now more into that sustainable, circular, but still commerce?
Yeah, so after, let's say, a little over 3.5 years at Cramp, building up a whole digital marketing department. So Cramp was technologically advanced. They had an online shop, but it was a lot about e-ordering, what I call, which in nature should be it, right? People need to order, deliver, use.
Yes.
But there's way more on e-com, where I said there's a difference between e-ordering and e-com. With e-com, you get into the experiences, personalization, and use digital marketing tactics to keep people loyal, etc.
With e-ordering, you're not doing it for fun.
No.
For example, you know the tractor, you know your machinery, exactly. And often, if you're the farmer, you may have delegated the ordering to a junior person in their job. Yeah. So there isn't that idea of desire, of building demand and loyalty, because it's just functional.
It's a very functional way of buying, right? But on the other hand, you can still make their life easier to support them because they don't always know the part number or the name, but they know they have a John Deere tractor and, it should fit. So that's where personalization and, comes into place. And also digital marketing, where we said, guys, we know that after a certain period of time, you need to renew. So then you kind of help them say, it's about time to renew this. Here's it.
But really, it's the difference between being part of their working life.
Yes.
And then with Dyson, it's more part of their lifestyle.
Yes. So when I got in contact with Dyson and I said, I love the appliance business. Let me start with that. I think agriculture was fantastic. It was a great addition to my career because of the work to be done in e-com and digital marketing, etc., which I love. But when Dyson gives a ring, I got back to my Philips time again. And then when we looked at innovation, there was always a Dyson machine on the table, of course, because the first Dyson appliance was the bagless vacuum cleaner.
And there's one of those reception.
And it was one of the receptions.
Absolutely.
One of the first ones, actually.
Yeah.
So you always, you have this iconic brand in your head where you say, wow, this must be so fascinating company to work for. So revolutionary, innovative from a branding perspective, quality. So that was one, right? So that attracted me to start and build my career here. The other one was, Gertin, we have something new. We have a new proposition. You've done something like this in the past in building a proposition in sustainable sales, which is not only about sales, but you need to look through the whole supply chain with us to see how we can optimize things, how to build processes, etc. So that's where my knowledge and background in operations, logistics, etc. will come back. And I think that was the connection between the two to basically merge and say, wow, it will be a perfect fit. And that's when I said, guys, I'll be joining. And here I am.
And here you are. So our time is coming to an end. Let's just finish it with what next. So you've sort of got your feet under the table, some incredibly interesting opportunities as well. When I walk out of the door and start wandering the streets of Amsterdam, what's the most exciting thing on your agenda now? What are you doing next?
I think next to, let's say, making sure that the whole refurbishment proposition gets even better, optimized, etc., with, let's say, the constraint of returns. I'll just make sure all the returns we refurbish and sell in the best possible way for Dyson. That's one.
Yeah.
And still lots to do there. The other big thing we're working on now is within the after-sales remit, making sure also our spare parts get to the right consumer, because we want to make sure as well that when people buy a product, they also get the right support to continue to love their product in the best possible way. Yes, we sometimes have quality problems as well, but we want to solve them as quickly as possible. And there's lots to do with Dyson still growing, and we're a growing company still. It's still a big scale up, I would call. So there's a lot of processes, etc., which need to be fine-tuned, built up, etc. I think that's where my experience coming from a bigger company like Philips comes into play. Like, you've seen it, you've done it. What can we use from your knowledge into building Dyson into well-designed processes, efficiency, etc., because we still continue to grow. And I think that's the big thing working on now, to mature Dyson, get processes into play, and get my experience with them. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, look, Gertin, it's been fascinating chatting.
Yes.
I'm going to snip some of these and send it to my daughter when she next asks me about career advice, because I think you've covered off so many points there, as well, of course, as giving us an insight into, how such an innovative brand is balancing that invention with quality, but also sustainability. Absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ian.